Ho, ho, hey, hey, the Seahawks won today. It's Real in the Field Goals, the instant reaction podcast from fieldgoals.com. Danny Kelly, Kenneth Arthur, two titans of podcasting, at least in the Seattle Seahawks circle, when it comes to instant reaction shows. These last few instant reactions, not so good. I think the quality of the show has been great. Immaculate.
Right. Yeah.
We're getting 10 out of 10 stars on podcast IMDb. So I think we're doing just fine there. But
yes,
the Seahawks, they made us get creative and talk about something that made us happy rather than them making us sad. This time, normally we do a show every Thursday, but this time the Seahawks played on Thursday. So that meant we're doing the instant reaction now. And hey, Dan, we get like a little bit of a break, I guess, from these instant.
Yeah, it's nice. It's instead of being like a commiseration about what the hell is going on, this is pretty thorough ass kicking, even if the second half wasn't necessarily all that fun.
Right. Let's just get it out there. Let's get it out there. If you're listening to this and you didn't watch the game, I'd like to know if there's anyone out there that listens to the Instant Reaction podcast but doesn't pay attention to the game.
Some people might have work or something on Thursday nights. You never know.
Right. But even if you didn't watch it, I would assume you know the score. But even still, Seahawks beat the Niners 20-3. Now, let's move in to the question that we ask every week. Dan, what's your instant reaction?
I feel very similar to the way that I felt after the Bears game, which is people are going to probably complain about some of the play in the second half and things like that. But at the end of the day, the Seahawks were in complete control of that game from start to finish. The Niners were 1 of 11 on third down. They only had 142 yards of offense total. They averaged 3 yards per play, 3.2 yards per play. The Seahawks had... Let me see here. I know. Michael Bennett himself had 3.5 sacks alone.
Overall, Colin Kaepernick was sacked 6 times.
Yep, the Seahawks had 6 sacks, which is great. 6 tackles for a loss, 9 QB hits, 1 forced fumble. And so, I felt really good about the defensive performance. I think they were completely dominant, and obviously, the Niners' offense isn't anything special, but to go into their place and do that to them when this is a rivalry game, their backs are up against the wall just as much as Seattle's are up against the wall, and just pretty much dominate the whole game. You have to feel good about that, even though, as per usual, it wasn't necessarily a pretty thing. The second half wasn't pretty by the Seahawks. But really, and Pete Carroll said this in the post-game press conference, it felt like a real Seahawks like type game. Like it was a normal Seahawks game. And I think what happened was after that Russell Wilson interception, I think Pete Carroll actually was pretty pissed about that. And he kind of, at that point, I bet you anything, he kind of just shut it down and said, okay, we're just going to run. Mm-hmm. And you know what, we're going to do our thing. We're going to do what we've done for years, what I've done for decades, which is, run the ball in the fourth quarter and end the game. And they did. They ended up, I think, running out the clock with they took the ball with 4 minutes something left and just ran the clock out. So.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Maybe the interception was a good thing if it sort of reminded Pete Carroll to get to his roots. Though I will say, very annoyed, that Russell Wilson had everything else go right. Outside of those 2 interceptions, he was 18 of 22 for 235 yards, over 10 yards per attempt on the other passes. And his passer rating, at the beginning, you're like, oh my God, he's going to have one of his big games. And outside of those 2 interceptions, those were really the only 2 blemishes that he had today. So I wanted him to have a perfect game, and instead, he had a perfect game and then 2 really, really bad mistakes. I don't know, there was conversation on Twitter about the fault of the interceptions, and what's your opinion on that?
I think that Russell should not have thrown that ball, but I will say that it looked like Curse stopped running his route briefly, which you just never want to see that. So I think you split the blame between those 2 players, but Pete Carroll was really perturbed at Russell for throwing that ball. He said something along the lines of he hasn't done something like that since his rookie year. Wow. I remember the play his rookie year. He basically threw the ball up for Braylon Edwards down the sideline, and Edwards kind of did the same thing. Edwards stopped running it, running his route more or less, and allowed the Cardinals to pick it off. So, I think he tried to give Kearse a shot at it, and if Kearse had ran through his route full speed, he could have had a chance to potentially at least break up the pass. So it's kind of annoying in that sense, but Wilson really shouldn't have thrown it.
Right. And overall, the Seahawks run the ball 41 times compared to 24 passes. This was really, though, like it seemed once it had been established in the first half that the Seahawks were a much, much better team than the 49ers. They go up 17-0. And then at the end of the half, they had that opportunity to possibly go up 24-0. At the very worst, you would have thought 20-0. It was easy. They were doing what they wanted to do. And despite the interception killing the chances of scoring any points at the end of the first half, really a dominating performance. And then in the third quarter, it started to seem like it was starting to get away from them again. But still, once they got to the fourth quarter, they could start to run the ball again, and that's why they skewed so heavily towards the runs. Marshawn Lynch, a season-high 122 rushing yards on 27 carries.
He looked really good, by the way.
Yeah, he looked
huge.
You start to worry, when especially if a guy is 29, 30, you start to worry that is there diminished, and he didn't look diminished at all, I thought, this week.
He looked like himself. He was breaking tackles, he was falling forward, he was making really good juke cuts, he displayed good vision. Kind of all the things that we've come to know about him. He bounced a few outside, which you really don't see that often. He's stiff-arming people. It looked like vintage Marshawn Lynch, which is really encouraging. Obviously, the Niners, you have to put the caveat with it, pretty much everything you say, which is the Niners are just not very good. But, at the end of the day, this is still a big rivalry game. You're seeing some of the stuff that the Niners are saying after the game, like the coach is talking about how it's all unacceptable. Torrey Smith tweeted unacceptable. They're obviously not happy about it. I think, they really like it. They hate the Seahawks, and, they probably were coming in here expecting to do better than that. And so I don't know. I think you have to feel pretty good about that win, regardless of all those different caveats. It's the Niners.
I think that it seems petty at this point to complain about winning, by 17 points, but I really felt the Seahawks probably should have won that game by more, 34-3, something like a real blowout.
Right.
They didn't. Though there are still things that they need to clean up, because just because you win by 17, I think they were much better than they were much better than that, the way that the 49ers played. And you look at the 49ers schedule now, they're 2-5, and they're 2 wins coming over the Giants and the Ravens. But then anytime now that they have played, over the Vikings and the Ravens, they got blown out by the Steelers. They got blown out by the Cardinals. They didn't get blown out by the Packers, but it was like, again, it was 17-3. They couldn't move the ball at all. And then the Seahawks come in. So I think the Seahawks put themselves on that level of being like, hey, we're a really good team. And anytime the 49ers play a really good team, they just are utterly and completely snuffed out. They don't have a chance. When you look at Colin Kaepernick's game, other than one drive, and look, I wrote an article for a recap for sportsonearth.com tonight. You can check that out. But the 49ers had 10 drives, I want to say, besides the end of half drive. Out of those 10 drives, 8 of them went for 7 or fewer yards.
Yeah.
Ridiculous how much they could not do anything. Colin Kaepernick, now, I don't know enough about because they don't reveal it, the formula of QBR, but just know that, Russell Wilson, despite his 84.5 quarterback rating, which would be bad or below average, these days, his QBR was 81.4, which is really, really good. Colin Kaepernick's QBR was 9.
Yeah, that's not good.
So he's a bad, you could say all these things. He's a bad quarterback. He doesn't have offensive line help. They don't have a good, smart coaching staff. Seahawks have a good defense. I guess my question to you, Colin Kaepernick was sacked 6 times. As we already said, they lost 43 yards on that sack. So Russell Wilson was sacked 5 times. They lost 23 yards. Colin Kaepernick was sacked 6 times. They lost 43 yards. Did you see that the 49ers just could not execute any plays, or did you see the Seahawks were just playing better than them, if that makes sense?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think obviously the Niners offense has been pretty inept at times this season, but they had looked pretty good the last 2 weeks. So, um, it does. I think it does. You still can say the Seahawks played well on defense. They got to him. I know when later in the game when the 49ers were looking like people were starting to they had the pucker factor start kicking in because of the 14-point lead in the fourth quarter. At a couple points during those drives, the Seahawks sacked him 3 or 4 times, So I mean, they really finished well and did what they needed to do. I think they made the Niners offense really toothless and just really looked inept out there. So you just have to be happy about that. Obviously the Niners have done that against a couple other people, but like I said, I mean, this is an NFL game, and and the good teams beat the teams they should beat, right? So, I just think overall, you could parse it out and talk about some of the bad things. I think the Seahawks offensive line is still atrocious, and that's definitely concerning. And there's other issues like Russell Wilson's decision making on those 2 plays. Obviously, he wants those plays back, but that happens in football. So, I don't know how much you have to be really concerned about that, but yeah, I mean, to me, I feel good about the win. I think there are a few things that they need to get cleaned up for sure, but the defense looked dominant. The run game looked really good, and those are the 2 important things. It just felt like the Seahawks got back to who they were. Like Earl Thomas is out there singing and dancing. Michael Bennett's doing the kiss your bicep thing. It felt like the Seahawks got their swagger back, kind of. You know what I mean? So in a lot of the ways, it's just. I think it's a big win for the Seahawks.
I want to get your thoughts on this. I went to my Google search bar just now to bring up profootballreference.com, and normally I'll type in pro and then just hit enter because of the auto-populate. This time, though, it did not auto-populate because I don't usually use this computer. So it just Googled the word pro, and I want to quiz you. What is the first hit when you Google pro?
Pro. Oh man, that is tough.
Yeah, it is. That's why
I have no freaking clue.
The first hit is a definition of the word pro.
Oh, I guess that's not very hard. Oh, yeah.
But
okay.
What is the first? what is the first listed definition of the word pro?
Professional.
No, a proponent of an issue.
Oh.
So you're pro football. You're pro Seahawks. Now,
I am, yes.
The second hit, surprisingly enough, profootballtalk.com. So
oh God.
they've done quite well for themselves as far as Google searches go. So that's one of the segments on the field goals. In case you didn't know, is I quiz Danny on Google's results.
And I'm terrible at it, obviously.
Some of the other numbers to go over real quickly. Tyler Lockett, a career high, 79 yards. We had a touchdown, obviously. 5 targets. He caught all 5 of his targets. Did you see, obviously, I don't know, it's one game, so you can't make too much out of it, but do you see Tyler Lockett, how much stock do you put into this game as far as his advancement in the offense?
I liked it. I think he, it wasn't just one of those fluky plays where he got behind the defense. He was making plays in the scramble drill, where he caught a ball, I think 1 yard short of a first down there when Russell Wilson escaped. He was making some plays on it. He made a bubble screen go for a few yards. He was kind of used all over the place. And so I think that he's really starting to kind of find his groove in the offense, and that's encouraging. Obviously this week, Jimmy Graham wasn't quite as involved, but he did get some targets. He had one catch over the middle that he dropped after the safety hit him really hard, which was a great hit by the safety. Mm-hmm. I think there was one other ball that he might have got. Oh, he got targeted on a third down. Russell Wilson kind of just missed him, and he was about to get sandwiched, so he didn't get a good. He only got one hand on it. But at the end of the day, they didn't pass the ball very often. I don't think. How many passes did Russell Wilson have in this one?
24.
24. So yeah, there you go. It's a low volume game. Lockett actually led the Seahawks with 5 targets. Fred Jackson had 4. Jermaine Kearse had 4. Jimmy Graham had 5. Actually, so he actually tied for the lead in targets. Just didn't get that one across the middle, which would have been big for him.
I want to know what your thoughts are on this, because one of those guys that you did not mention was Doug Baldwin, who was targeted 3 times. He had 2 catches for 19 yards, and it follows up a game in which he had 3 catches for 23 yards. And then I'm looking now at his game log, and I see that in the last 5 games, including tonight, he's been targeted 3 times, 4 times, 3 times, 4 times, and 3 times, as opposed to in the first 2 weeks, he was targeted 17 times total. And if you go back to last season, how many times was he targeted? 4 times or less? 1, 2, 3. So he's already been targeted 4 times or less, more times by a good margin than he was all of last year. I wonder how much of that is going to be made of Doug Baldwin standing in the offense, taking a step back now that Wilson becomes more comfortable with Lockett and Graham, and it clearly starts to favor Kearse more because Kearse has come up big and bigger in big situations.
Yeah, and I don't think it's not an indictment on Doug, I don't think. I just think the Seahawks have more weapons now. Doug was kind of their number 1 guy last year. So I think with guys with the 2 guys that the teams probably try and game plan for would be Baldwin and Graham. So that opens up opportunities for Lockett and Kearse, and I really just think it's that it's the Seahawks tend to go in waves too in terms of who they work into their in their game plan every week, and so. Obviously you'll see last week, Graham got 8 targets and then it was only 5 this week, and he'll probably, it fluctuates week to week. It's not a real consistent thing. So I don't read a whole lot into it. I think that, we'd probably, Doug was open for that touchdown. And if Wilson, didn't have to scramble away from just pressure up the middle, he probably would have hit him there and it would have been a touchdown. So that is why pressure from the front line is so key to a defense. So that's a perfect example of why the Seahawks like to disrupt timing when they press on the line. It's all about timing. So, because that's the quarterback hits his back foot, he wants to release the football. But Russell Wilson had to run because there's a guy free rushing at him, which is a really common occurrence this year, obviously. So, but yeah, I think, I don't know. I haven't noticed Baldwin playing. I don't think he's playing poorly. I don't think it's necessarily there's no real reason for it. I think it's just kind of one of those things that spread the targets around, and he probably have a couple big games this year, probably a few games where he only gets, like you said, 3 targets. Yeah. So
I wonder, maybe it's because nothing was working for the 49ers on offense today, but Torrey Smith, just 1 target, no catches. I'm looking at his career game log, and he's got a couple. I don't have all the circumstances in front of me to see if he was injured in these games or whatever. He's only got a couple games in his career of one or less target. Did you see anything as far as, I know you already talked, I know there's been some chatter. There was chatter going into the night about Richard Sherman, whether that was warranted or not. And there was chatter during the game that he's his play. So did you have any thoughts on, especially at one point, well, it really was brief that Kerry Williams came out of the game for a play or something like that.
I think 1 play, yeah.
But did you see anything that was especially, did they just completely shut down the receivers from your perspective?
Yeah, and it's funny because the only receptions the Niners had, it felt like. Well, okay, so I take that back. Vernon Davis, again, it was a tight end. Vernon Davis had a pretty big game, relatively. Obviously, then they only passed for 124 yards, but he got half of those. And he was kind of doing some stuff where it was up the seam. There was a couple plays where he got open after Cap scrambled. So that's kind of that's not necessarily quote bad coverage. That's just you can't cover guys forever, really. And so I felt that the defense actually played really strong on the outside. I think that they tried to target Kerry Williams a little bit, but then they started having Russell or Richard Sherman follow Torrey Smith around, and we saw exactly what happened there. No catches, 1 target. Richard Sherman shut him down. So I really don't buy into idea or narrative that Sherman has fallen off at all. I think he's the same guy who he's always been. He's going to give up a few receptions. Like, I don't think again, it's just like expectations. Like, do you expect him to not give up any receptions all year? Like, that's ridiculous. And then obviously, like, Pro Football Focus is kind of, they were talking about today how they were talking about Kerry Williams, right? He's like 100th out of 100 last 3 games.
But Sherman was 83rd or something.
Yeah, and so I don't know if like maybe they ascribed the blame for that Carolina touchdown to him, which potentially it was his fault. But after the game, we found out that the Seahawks were in 2 different coverages, so I don't really know how you decide who to blame for that.
You flip a coin and say, "Oh, let's give him a grade of a negative 1.5 because that means something to us."
Yeah, well, and I don't know what happened there, but bottom line, and it's not just PFF. Like, there was a Seattle Times columnist who wrote about it today, how Richard Sherman's fallen off and all that, and I just don't buy that. I don't think that's right. I think he's playing as strong as he always has. I think people don't test him the way they used to. It's all underneath stuff, back shoulder stuff, where he's staying over the top. A lot of it is like slants and things like that, which the Seahawks, and just in general, their defense isn't really built to defend as a cornerback, because how they play the cover 3 or man outside. So bottom line is, I don't feel at all concerned about Richard Sherman's play to this point. I'm not. It's like, no. I don't even think about it, honestly.
Yeah, I think that if you ask any single coach in the NFL if they wanted Richard Sherman, they without a doubt would all say yes. I mean, there's no question still at this point. They're just the fact of the matter is they don't throw towards him with anything that goes for anything. So if they do throw towards him, it's a small gain if it gets completed at all, or for the most part, Richard Sherman just doesn't get thrown at, and that's sort of the whole point. He doesn't have any interceptions through 7 games, but the interceptions only matter in a certain context. When you look back to the years prior, I mean, if you look at 2013 or whatever it is, that he was like targeted like 48 times and still had like 8 interceptions, which is just ridiculous. I mean, that's not just talent. That's also really being fortunate as well.
Right.
Have that many catchable interceptions, but absolutely, I don't think there's anything to worry about with Richard Sherman. This was a good game. I'm interested to see the numbers tomorrow when it's all added up. As I said, I did go to Pro Football Reference once I've typed out the whole address, and the 142 total yards allowed is the fewest of the season. They gave up 146 to the Bears. They gave up 8 first downs compared to 7 first downs to the Bears. Also, I just wanted now Michael Bennett, his 3.5 sacks now gives him 6.5 sacks in 7 games. So that's going to be really going to pump up his numbers there. The Seahawks won the time of possession 38 minutes to 22 minutes, basically.
That's huge.
Which, again, they lost the turnover battle. 2 turnovers for them compared to they didn't force any turnovers. So now when they've won the turnover battle this season, which is against the Rams, the Bengals, and the Panthers, they are 0-3. And when they've lost the turnover battle, which is to the Packers, Lions, and 49ers, they're 2-1. Yeah. So that's completely
it's a season of outliers. It's odd.
Right. The Malcolm Gladwell season. So and then I just want to throw in a few other numbers. Oh yeah, Marshawn Lynch, 127. I think I already said that's a season high. His first one over 100 yards. He looked good. They used Thomas Rawls. I think it was a type of game where you can use your backup running back more often because you don't want Marshawn Lynch to run the ball 35 times. He still ran it 27 times. But Thomas Rawls had 6 carries for 32 yards, 5.3 yards per carry.
How about that? That's pretty great.
I like that, man. Thomas Rawls is my favorite player on the team. So I don't care what anyone says. I'm all about Thomas Rawls. He is going to be the future of the team. Cliff Averill, 1.5 sacks. That puts him at a total of 3.5 sacks, which ties him with Bruce Irvin on the team for second. Now that
that doesn't do a very good job of painting how fucking good he's been, though.
Cuff Averill, arguably still the MVP of the defense or the whole team.
Yeah, he's been
now.
really, really good.
Yeah, he stepped up in a big way, and he's never made the Pro Bowl before, but that could change this season.
I think he's honestly one of the most underrated players in the NFL.
You should write that article.
That's a good idea. But I mean, I'm serious. That's not coming just from like a Seahawks fan perspective. Like, he is really, really good, and he gets like almost no credit. Like, I mean, it's not like he doesn't get credit. People just don't talk about him very much, you know?
Right. I mean, if they could talk about anyone, it's going to be Bennett on the Seahawks.
Right. Or any of the other outspoken, crazy assholes on the Seahawks.
Right. Averill, yeah. He had 5 sacks last year, 8 sacks the year before, 9.5 the year before with Detroit, 11 the year before that. So he's really actually he's
stuff too. Like, he's like top tier.
It is interesting that it's a lot of it has to do with just the way the Seahawks play, but he's had fewer sacks in each of the last 4 seasons. So this year he has a real good chance to change that trend. Even though, there's no doubt Bennett could be headed towards a double-digit sack, which I don't think either of these guys have had in their previous 2 years with the team.
No. But
despite 5 sacks last year from Averill, it's still one of his best seasons, and he was missed hugely in the Super Bowl second half. Next up, it's the Cowboys and the Seahawks for once. We'll get a little bit of rest, so they get 10 days before that game.
That's awesome.
The Cowboys are starting Matt Castle this week, so
that's awesome.
There are things to look forward to, and like I've been saying all along, if you get into the bye week at 4-4, and I've said that before the Bengals game. So
you did.
I know that if you get into that break at 4-4, this is, and you said this, I think yesterday's podcast where we previewed the game with David Ficillo, that this is the type of team that they are talented to the point where you could see them winning their last 8 games or whatever. Like they are.
I mean, there's no reason that they couldn't.
They've done similar things in the last 3 seasons or whatever. And I really think that if they get into that bye week at 4-4 and you look around at the rest of the NFC, like right now when I look at the NFC, I see the Packers number 1, no doubt. You have Aaron Rodgers. Their defense is actually playing even better than they have in a long time. So the Packers number 1, no problem. But then even after that, I don't care about the Panthers record. I don't care about the Falcons record. I don't even care. The Cardinals have disappointed, and they've lost 2 of the last 3 games. I would even say that maybe if the Philadelphia Eagles are the second best team in the NFC. So if the Eagles are the second best team in the NFC, I don't see any reason why in a couple of weeks the Seahawks can't be the second best team in the NFC. So if they get in at 4-4, I think it's going to be they're going to get that bye week, and I think they come in. They get an easier schedule. 5 of the last 8 are at home. They play teams like the Vikings, who I don't think are very good. I think they're a little overrated, and at that point anything could happen. So I think this is obviously the type of feelings that you have after a win, but especially getting a road win that maybe a while ago did not seem that it was a little bit tougher. We're probably at San Francisco on a Thursday preseason before you see the 49ers play. That's a scary game, and they go in there
for sure, man.
And they win that.
Winning a road game in San Francisco, I don't care about any of the other caveats. Like, that's still a big deal, honestly. Obviously, the Niners are not a good team right now, but I mean, that is a rivalry game. We've seen some of the crazy shit that happens between division teams this year. I mean, like, look at like every other division. Like, you just never know what you're going to get in division games.
I'm going to say your caveat counter for this episode is at 2.
But yeah, I mean, I'm serious. Like, I think that, all those, that's fine. That I understand why people are throwing those caveats out, but you just beat the Niners in their place. Like, really, like, dominated them.
Yeah. And, so I don't, and there's no problem. You get in there 4-4. You also play the Cardinals twice in the second half of the year. I mean, that's the one team maybe that you have to worry about in terms of the division. I think the Cardinals, a lot of the games that the Seahawks have had to go through and did not, succeed, but still had to go through, the Cardinals have not gone through those games. They still have to go. They have to go to Seattle, obviously. That's week 10. They haven't played the Bengals yet. That comes in week 11.
Where do they play? Do they play in Cincy or at home?
That's a home game for Arizona. So they get that. But then their next 2 are road division games at San Francisco and at St. Louis. And then their final 4, Minnesota, at Philadelphia, Green Bay, and Seattle. So they still have to do the Green Bay game. They have to do the Bengals game. They have to do the at San Francisco game. They have to do the at St. Louis game. And the Seahawks already took care of all those games. Maybe they didn't win them all, but they got through them. And the rest of their schedule is the stuff like the Ravens and the Browns. So I think that the Seahawks are with a win in Dallas are in a good position.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's just you don't want to look too far forward, but win this game and they're okay. They definitely back, on the right track for sure. I mean, for a while there last week, I was like, "Ooh, God, like this year is not looking good." But you know what? After this win, and you go in and if you can win in Dallas, then that changes the whole dynamic again. Like I talked about that, like the dynamic changed after the loss last week. If you can win in Dallas, the dynamic is totally different again. It's back to the Seahawks being the Seahawks.
Right. Yeah, they got to do that. And it'll be interesting if they're facing Matt Castle and Kristen Michael in Dallas.
That'll be weird.
I don't know what the status of Des Bryant is. I know that he was practicing something there. He turned it somewhat this week. But yeah, we'll talk about that when it's time to talk about that.
Exactly.
So that's it for Real on the Field Goals. In case I know a lot of you were wondering, I went and saw Crimson Peak this week. So, for those of you that tuned in for Real on the Film Goals, I loved Crimson Peak. I
got a few tweets about our film reviews. So people are obviously listening. So that's cool.
I'm telling you, Crimson Peak, 9 out of 10 hockeys, and it was a visual masterpiece. If you can handle a little bit of gore, then I'd say take your lady and have her squeeze you hard during the scary parts. All right. Well, that's a good note to wrap it up. I never know what to say the final words, so I'm handing it over to you, Dan.
Make sure to follow us on Twitter. You can follow Kenny at Kenneth Arthur S. I'm at Field Goals. Follow us. Obviously, go to fieldgoals.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Look up look up Real on the Field Goals. You also can look up Deep Balls. That's what Jackson and I do every week. And then you can look up 3000 NFL Mock Draft. That's what Kenny and Rob Staten do. It's a great podcast. So yeah, look up all those and subscribe to them, and you'll get lots of good content from us, hopefully. So yeah, that's about all I've got to say.
I like that. It's a good catchphrase. Well, that's about all I've got to say.
That was probably the dorkiest thing I've ever said.